Hello and welcome to another episode of the CIRS Group podcast. I'm Jacie,
And I'm Barbara.
and today we have a very special guest who will intro in just a moment. But before we jump in, just a reminder that none of this is medical advice. Definitely check in with your CIRS provider to see if anything we're talking about today might help you in your CIRS journey. So our very special guest is Dr. Dayan Goodenowe. He's a PhD neuroscientist, biochemist, synthetic organic chemist, inventor, and clinical research expert. Back in 1999, he invented and patented a revolutionary ion cyclotron resonance mass spectrometry technology, a tremendous machine that made it possible to monitor human biochemistry comprehensively for the first time in history. Then from there, he developed the use of plasmalogens, which is what we're going to be talking about today, to help people recover from chronic health conditions like MS, ALS, autism, and most recently, his work has shown a positive impact on CIRS patient outcomes, me included. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in our talk today.
Let's get into it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Goodenowe. We are so excited to have you on the podcast and help us kind of better understand what plasmalogens are. So, to lead us off, what are plasmalogens?
Well, thank you guys for having me. And I'm excited about your community and many people getting benefits from plasmalogens. It's an interesting molecule. And what's so strange about them is that it's the most important vitamin, basically, that no one ever gets told about. And I did a lot of work on vitamins. You think about vitamins, and most of them were all discovered and validated back in the 20s and 30s, like really a short window of time. And plasmalogens are a molecule that are part of every membrane of your body, right? So your body is like 30 trillion cells, and every one of those cells has a membrane around it. It's a phospholipid membrane that makes the biological walls of your body. But also inside all of your cells, there's membranes that separate your nucleus from the rest of the cell, a membrane around your mitochondria, a membrane around your peroxisome. So these membranes are how the body compartmentalizes its activities. And so in a disease like CIRS or syndrome like CIRS, you end up with this demand of function overload, right? This inflammation is overwhelming the system, forcing the system to kind of shut down and be suboptimal. And that affects this membrane structure because the membranes of our bodies contain a lot of reserve molecules. And plasmalogens are one of those. So they're part of every single membrane of your body. And there's multiple types of them. Some of them are involved in the coating of your neurons, like the protective myelin. And some of them are involved in the synapses, the release of the neurotransmitters. And some of them are involved in the regular, import and export of materials in and out of your cells. So they're critical to every single cell of the body. And there are certain areas of the body that are even more concentrated than others. So, for example, the immune system. So immune cells have one of the highest concentrations of plasmalogens. So plasmalogens, some of the natural sources been studied for years and years are alkyl glycerols from shark liver oil, for example, right? And these things can improve immune function. And so plasmalogens were originally discovered back in, I think, 1919 or 1920. So they're not new. And normally we make a lot of them. So, 20, 30% of your entire brain, 50% of the phospholipids in your heart are plasmalogens, high levels in your, like I said, immune cells, but your kidney, the retina of your eye. So we're not talking about a trace molecule. We're talking about a molecule that is a core constituent of every single cell of your body. And it's actually where your body stores a lot of the omega-3s. So it's a reservoir as well, and it's an antioxidant. So anyway, we discovered them, scientifically over 100 years ago now. And it didn't show up as this deficiency like a normal, like, get a vitamin D deficiency and someone gets rickets, or a vitamin C deficiency and someone gets, say, scurvy. But in the 1970s, certain classes of diseases were recognized as plasmalogen deficient diseases. These are children diseases like leukodystrophy, and there's a rhizomelic chondrodysplasia punctata, these type of diseases that were really, really serious. Like these children would only live for a year or two, right? And they would die. And they'd have severe neuromuscular issues, severe neurological issues. And it was found out that these children were dying because the enzymes that the body normally makes to make plasmalogens were genetically altered at birth. And so the obligate nature of plasmalogens to human health became obvious at that point in time. It says clearly the human body cannot survive without plasmalogens. And the interesting thing about these molecules is that they're not dietarily available. Okay. The only real source of plasmalogen precursors in the human food supply is breast milk. Okay. So breast milk contains a certain amount of these alkyl glycerols, the same one that's in that product, proton Glia, the omega-9 version. And it's designed to go into the brain and into the myelin and help when a child is born, they're born plasmalogen deficient. So breastfeeding improves the development of the brain, improving the white matter and all that stuff. And then after about 6 to 9 months, about month 12, the baby typically has good endogenous capacity. And then this plasmalogen manufacturing in our bodies is what gives our brain development, the myelination, but not just the myelination in the brain, but your all the neurons like that drive your muscles are driven by like the Schwann cells that they all of these things develop, and we develop over time. And we continue to build these up into our 50s. Like our structure of our body gets better and better. And then what can happen though is when things happen in our world that overwhelm that capacity. Autism is a very good example. So all these diseases that you see where there's a white matter component to it, like schizophrenia, bipolar, autism, aging in general, there's a loss of this white matter. And this is basically a plasmalogen loss. And so, so CIRS, which is this inflammatory syndrome that is thrust upon people, right? Some exogenous source or some alteration in your environment and exposure has created this cascade of events. And there's an insult that's occurred that has been prolonged long enough that you can't pick up the pieces. So our body has lots of plasmalogens, and it's your first line of defense against inflammation. So all this myocarditis that people are having right now, for example, right? So your heart contains like 50% of the molecules are plasmalogens. And so when you get an inflammation event, your cells, the membranes, these 30 trillion cells of your body have a bunch of reservoir there. And they pump these plasmalogens out because the bond in them, this vinyl ether bond, is exquisitely sensitive to acid. And so it will react with peroxides and oxidative stress molecules and neutralizes them. And it's different than a regular, antioxidant. Like a lot of molecules like these flavonoids or CoQ10, these type of molecules, they're antioxidant, but they're really kind of hot potato holders. Okay, they'll pick up a free electron, but they don't really neutralize it. They kind of just carry it for something else to get rid of. Plasmalogens are different. They're like a electrical fuse, if you will. They react with the free radicals and they break apart. And in the process, they get destroyed. But in their process of getting destroyed, they actually completely neutralize the reactive oxygen species. And so your body kind of pumps them out like a fire blanket, basically. So what happens in disease like CIRS and autism and other types of chronic or even autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis is that if you get a chronic stress, so short-term stress, like some short-term event happens in your life and your body, it's like a reservoir, like a mountain water reservoir, for example, in a fire, it dumps the water out to stop the fire. And as long as the fire gets put out, that's fine, because then you can go and recover and gradually the reservoir fills back up again. But if the insult goes on too long, the reservoir gets too low and you can't catch up. And this is the situation that we're dealing with a lot of the autoimmune systems that we're dealing with right now. So these are these very interesting molecules. They're made inside your peroxisomes, which is another part of your organelle. So it's linked to general things that we think are good for our health, right? Resistance training, time-restricted eating, these type of things. They improve the fatty acid metabolism of our body. So, carnivore diets and fat diet, like, getting a proper fat protein combination in your diet. These all support this peroxisomal function of the human body, and they support plasmalogen manufacturing. So it's some of the contributions, I do a lot of work in Alzheimer's. So in Alzheimer's resistance training. You take someone with dementia and you put them on resistance training and proper diet, and you get cognitive improvement, like clinical cognitive improvement, more so than any drug could ever achieve. And so we know that these things are linked. And so people take these nuggets of information and then they want to apply it to their regular world. So that's kind of the whole story about plasmalogens. Now, my background, like my PhD is actually in medicine, psychiatric medicine, looking at the biochemical mechanisms of diseases, psychiatric diseases specifically. And so I had never heard of these damn things. So, and so I'm supposed to be an expert in this field, right? So back in the 90s and early 2000s, so I invented this technology called ion cyclotron mass spectrometry for comprehensive metabolite analysis. And we were studying dementia, basically changes in cognition. And these molecules were showing up as being decreased in all these individuals with Alzheimer's and cognitive impairment. What are these molecules? Because they look kind of weird. They had 7 oxygens instead of 8. Weird stuff, like from a chemistry perspective. And so, and seriously, I'm Googling this stuff. Like, what are these things? Like, where are these molecules coming from? And it's plasmalogens. I'm going, well, what the hell are these things? And so, and I'm going, and how could you not know about these things? Like, you can't unknow this. Like, this is like, what? Like the whole synaptic function of the membrane, like the ability for your membranes to release neurotransmitters is entirely dependent upon plasmalogen. And it's all published. It's all out there, right? And I'm going, how did I not know this? And so, and there's been studies, post-mortem studies in the 80s and 90s showing their decreased levels and all this kind of stuff, right? So the problem was that there was no real way to restore these things, right? You'd think, oh, well, the obvious thing is you have a deficiency. Why can't I just eat plasmalogens, right? It's like a good steak is going to have plasmalogen in it. Like it's any kind of meat product. If our cells have all these plasmalogens, then the cells of animal products have to have plasmalogens. And so anyway, but the problem is when your body makes them, that last step is designed to be really sensitive to acids. And of course, your stomach is concentrated hydrochloric acid, right? Like pH of 1, 2, which is important because it's your first line of defense in your digestive tract. So when you eat a plasmalogen in its fully form, it doesn't make it past your stomach. And so you need plasmalogen precursors. And there's these old ones that were developed back in the 60s, like called battle alcohol and chymal alcohol, these type of things. But they never really seemed to get into the human body. They've tried these and never worked. And so, I'm also a medicinal chemist, so I synthesized and designed. So I obviously saw these molecules going down in Alzheimer's and other things. We got to figure out a way to restore these stupid things. It's ridiculous. There's got to be a way to do this. And so found out that you had to pre-attach the structure. And if we do that, these alkyl acyl glycerols, we could restore plasmalogens on demand. I could restore an omega-9 plasmalogen. I could restore an omega-3 plasmalogen based upon how we design the structure of the molecule. And that's how Protum Neuro and Protum Glia was created. And so now, and that can now restore plasmalogen. So we now have a mechanism, which is basically, Protum Glia is basically concentrated breast milk in all extensive purposes. And then the neuro is a much more potent molecule. So we kind of call one, like the omega-9, which is the glia, is really kind of protective. It's that molecule that it's like your get out of the emergency room free molecule. Like it's the one that like if you're near death, you want that one. And then the omega-3 is kind of it's very potent DHA. It's really activating. So typically in diseases like these autoimmune diseases like CIRS and others, we start with the omega-9s, like get this inflammation under control. We can talk a little bit about the mechanisms. And then sometimes that doesn't get you out of your brain fog though. Like you kind of feel better and you feel like you've gotten out of the dumps, if you will, but you just don't seem to have that bounce in your steps, so to speak, or bounce in your brain, if you will. And then the neuro is really where that activation comes in. So, and we kind of do those, and we've learned with everyone trying different things and different combinations. And of course, you want to do all the other things. Like when you're in this the hypermetabolic state, right? Which what CIRS is, your methyltransferase system gets overloaded. Your mitochondrial system gets overloaded. So it's still important to take your N-acetylcysteines and your carnitines and your CoQ10s and all this other stuff that you need to be doing, because when you're in a hypermetabolic inflamed state, your body just goes through more vitamins than a normal person goes through. Like, so you become depleted, not just of plasmalogens, but you can get depleted of other things, like just your simple B12s and like, and good old fashioned, we don't respect some of the good old fashioned B vitamins, like just good old fashioned riboflavin, you know, thiamine, like the B1, B2, like and niacin, like they're important. We go, oh yeah, I've heard about those for the last 100 years, but they're important for a reason. Like you can get depleted, and it's really hard in today's food supply to maintain all those things. So yeah, so anyways, that's the long answer to your short question
That was a great
of
answer, though.
plasmalogens and how that all kind of came to be.
That was great. I will speak from personal experience that the neuro is definitely for people like me who might be used to taking supplements and just like, oh, I can't tell the difference. I'll just take this supplement and I guess it's doing something good. No, you feel the neuro. Like
It's
you
not
feel
placebo.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, not at all. It's intense.
So my new morning hack is the neuro, and you take some ketone esters. Okay, I use it. If anything tastes worse than neuro, it's probably some of the ketone ester products. But and then some hydrogen water, and you put those three things together, improves your mitochondrial function. We're seeing it in our clients, and that basically prevents the need for coffee anymore. So that's my little, but yeah, you definitely feel the neuro. Lights get brighter, everything feels on for sure.
Yeah. And I like I think even with neuro and you mentioned this, we should plug your wonderful talk for the CIRS Summit interview you did with Dr. Christian Navarro-Torres. So if any of you guys haven't checked out the CIRS Summit, you definitely should. We'll have a link in the description for that. So you did plug the fact that you want to do it very slowly. Like, and we're talking not just like one a day, but you could even do one and then skip a couple days and do another one. Like you could titrate up very slowly with the neuro if you're going to go that direction, just to be very careful with it and obviously pay attention to your body and the reactions that you're
Well, you get a bit of
encountering.
a flushing result because what you're doing. So what happens in CIRS and other hypermetabolic, like overwhelming states, is your cells shut down, and they kind of turtle. They're like we call them senescent cells, and people get all kind of bent out of shape saying, "I want to get rid of all my senescent cells," which is true. Like a certain amount of autophagy is good, but some of these cells actually can just wake up again and actually be fully functioning again. So it's not you don't have to get rid of all of them. And so what can happen is you activate these cells. Okay, because now you're adding these membrane phospholipids back into the system, and they turn back on again, and they start kind of getting rid of all the garbage. So you get this little bit of a flushing response. So you can have this same thing with children with like a PANS disorder, right? PANS and PANDAS. You'll see that kind of exactly. Go slow. Everyone has a unique experience. Like some people go to high doses pretty quick, and some it's like, oh my goodness, I can feel one capsule, which is crazy, right? But
Yeah,
your community can be really, really sensitive. And so yes, go slow, take a chance, and it always washes out of your system. So don't be
right.
afraid. Like, if you just stop for a day and try again, and you kind of pulse it if you have to as you go forward. But yeah, it's most people find their sleep improves and their, that kind of like with the glia for sure. But yeah, absolutely always go slow. Just take it in a cycle if you have to.
Sure.
So I know from my own experience, I was doing all of the things, right? I was doing intermittent fasting and carnivore, and I did the Shoemaker protocol, and I thought I was good to go. And then I started taking Glia and Neuro, and it's like I hit the next level. For me with Glia, I noticed that my recovery time from exposure is like halved what it was before. And I think it is that resilience you were talking about. And then with Neuro, I just felt like my brain turned back on. It was the coolest experience. I'm kind of further along in the Shoemaker protocol though. So can you speak a little bit about how Glia and Neuro positively impact CIRS patient outcomes? And then kind of like, should they look at doing glia earlier in the protocol to turn things back on, like you were saying, and then neuro a little bit later?
Yeah, so the first phase is really trying to gradually rebuild yourself back up to baseline. Okay. And when you feel baseline, you're still going to be actually depleted because the body has a tremendous amount of resilience, right? And we fall into this trap of looking at the causes of all these dysfunctions, which are real, right? We talk about mold and ticks and different exposures for heavy metals or pesticides, right? And those are all real, right? Those statistical associations are unambiguously established. But what we forget always is that even though those are absolutely real, unambiguous statistical associations, the vast majority of people seem to be able to tolerate these exposures without getting super sick. And that is actually the critical component. It shows you that the human body, the human physiology has tremendous capacity to overcome toxicity. And I'll give you an example. Okay, so when we study these plasmalogen precursors and people do other things, we have animal models where they create absolute unambiguous. So when we study multiple sclerosis and this white matter demyelination, which is actually probably the critical component for CIRS long term, because if you're feeling the symptomology, you're going to have microglial inflammation, you're going to have white matter, diffuse white matter loss. Okay, and in advanced MRI, we'd be able to detect all of that kind of stuff, right? But take a molecule like cuprazone, which we've been studying for 50 some years, reproducibly creates demyelination. So if you put cuprazone, so it's a dietary toxin, you put in a diet of an animal, you will cause demyelination in 100% of the animals, 100% of the time. So this is not like a statistical association like an environmental toxin for humans, right? But if you take those animals and you provide them with myelination support, the plasmalogen precursors, and proper diet, you can 100% in 100% of the animals prevent the demyelination even while they're taking the toxin.
Wow.
It tells you something about how, like, if you provide the body with the right materials, it can survive. It can not only survive, it can thrive. In the study we did with this cuprazone animals with the plasmalogen precursors, the animals on cuprazone and plasmalogens actually had better brains than the control animals. So not only was the animal able to tolerate and thrive in the presence of this toxic exposure, they were actually able to overcome it to a greater extent. And this is where the real lesson is. And we do similar studies for Parkinson's. Some kids in their 20s back in the 1980s were trying to design some designer heroin here in California. And they didn't do a very good job. So they created the synthesis procedure had a toxic byproduct, and they gave them, it's not funny because they gave themselves Parkinson's. So a bunch of these kids went into emergency rooms with full-blown Parkinson's in their 20s, which of course never happens. And so the scientific community is saying, well, what's going on with these children or, adults, of course. And they finally figured out that there was a byproduct in this manufacturing process that they were doing in their house that created this molecule called MPTP. And so ever since then, we've used this molecule MPTP as a toxic molecule for creating Parkinson's. And so MPTP will create Parkinson's 100% of the time in 100% of the animals. So it goes into the dopamine cells, kills these dopamine cells. Like the cuprazone, though, if you treat animals with plasmalogens, they have no toxicity. So you can completely prevent the Parkinson's, and we can recover from the MPTP damage after the fact. And this is what's so exciting about the resilience of human biochemistry, is that if we feed the body the right stuff, it can become resilient and it can overcome these things. And by all means, remove your toxic exposures, right? Obviously create the proper environment to live in. But if we get this resilience in place, that can really overcome a lot. So when you're in this active state of CIRS or any other chronic autoimmune type scenario, the first step is to get up to baseline. But that'll trick you though, because you think you're fine when you're not, because your body, like we do this with concussions, for example. When we give people have a concussion, they get a return to play designation. They say, hey, you go back to play. But if you look at their brain has not recovered at all. It's tricked you because your body's going to try to find a way. Like you're there, you're here in your life to survive, right? And it's going to bend whatever rule it needs to bend to get you on your way. And so what happens for what you're dealing with now is that you get past this symptomology and you can get started back into life. But restoring that loss, like this is where people get into, we do much like for multiple sclerosis, and I've shown stories where, women, blind with optic neuritis for 30 years can now read and see. And so we can, like, that's actually, like, those things are now real. And so back to what we're talking about now is you get back to this baseline, but as you start ramping up, you know, you can't stop right there, right? As you're feeling it. And so that's kind of the hard part is to kind of go slow at beginning. It's like a drown, you know, someone who's been in the desert for 2 weeks, you know, you can't give them a gallon of water. They got to sip it for a little while first before they can drink it. And I think that's what's happened sometimes when we have these chronic diseases is that, you know, and as you mentioned, Jacie, like after you get past a certain point, you kind of accelerate. It's like it builds on itself, right? You build a little more capacity, a little more capacity, a little more capacity, and then you can kind of, you know, build it into your life. So, yeah.
Yeah,
I definitely feel like I feel better now than I maybe ever have.
that's amazing.
And that's it. And, you know, we talk about CIRS, like we talk about gut function and brain function, leaky blood-brain barrier, leaky gut barrier. And there are things that we can do now highly reproducibly to improve those things. And so we're here to talk about plasmalogens, but they're just they're an important tool in your toolkit. They're not the entire toolkit, right? So, and so, you know, you guys try a bunch of different solutions. We do the same thing with all of our clients and all of our interactions is, you know, the combinations of things work really well. So healing leaky gut syndrome, you know, leaky brain syndrome, these things kind of all go hand in hand. And so the plasmalogens are like a critical tool in the toolbox, but you know, you want to do other things that are healthy as well.
To return a little bit to the kind of like, you know, titrating up and, you know, maybe negative effects. Just curious for the audience, if let's say they have their Glia and their Neuro and they're going to start trying them, are there some maybe negative side effects or some indications that they're going too fast or taking too much that they should be watching out for? Or is there any common like side effects, for lack of better words?
Yeah, so normally, like, so for chronic immune like this, I try to get people dosing 3 times a day. So the very first time you typically start, most people notice their sleep improves. And so, and you kind of, you know, start some at night and then the morning and then afternoon, but 3 times a day is typically a good process of slowly building it up into your system nicely. Now, some people get a counter effect. So mostly when you take the Glia, people sleep better. Like they find their deep sleep gets much better. A lot of people that are measuring it, the amount of sleep is weird. Like people can sleep less hours and get higher quality sleep. But on the adverse, if you start feeling anxious or you feel the opposite, like this is making you get more, you know, irritable or anxious. So if you feel it, it's kind of like melatonin sometimes will have the opposite effect in individuals. Like some people, melatonin is just great. And some people, melatonin they just get wide awake from it. It's just like the most weird opposite effect. And if that's the case, go back in time. Like you can go earlier in the day, for example, start with a lower dose, you know, and try back again. And it could be the pulsing effect. It really is person to person dependent. And the nice thing about these molecules, like you said, they're not placebos. You kind of know, like you're not taking sugar water, right? Like it does something when you take it, right?
Yeah.
And it goes away the next day. So you don't have to worry about it. Don't have to get freaked out about it. There's no long-term issues. And so take a day off, try again, take another day off if you have to, and then you go up. And sometimes if you are tolerating it really well, people can sometimes what they get, if you are tolerating it, you can play around with high doses too. Like I've had people where they have restless leg syndrome, for example, right? And so if you take a big dose of, like I use the liquids because you know people like the gel caps is fine. But and I'm told I can never make any comments on taste because I'm way past the taste side.
I love the taste of Glia. I think it tastes like acorn-fed ham.
Yeah, and you can put it in anything. Like, well, that's the other thing about Glia. It's basically bulletproof. You could deep fry French fries in it if you wanted to. Like, so, but obviously it'd be very expensive. But but it's pretty well stable. Like we cook this stuff at 130 degrees Celsius, like which is 30 degrees over boiling water before we bottle it. So it's very heat stable. It's very pure omega-9s in there. And so you can put it in with your eggs. And if you have kids, you can, put it in their mac and cheese. You can kind of put it wherever you want it, right? So that's exactly what Jacie says. I like the taste of it as well. But the point is that you can go to a high dose, short periods of time. Like if you take a third of a bottle, like a 5-10 mils at one shot, if you have rested legs, sometimes it'll just stop it and never comes back. Like it's really like sometimes a high dose every now and then can really, obviously check your tolerability, but you can, again, it's not going to hurt you. Like our ALS clients and our rare disease children, they take 15 ml, they take a half a bottle a day. Okay. So they go through really high doses. So we have people on so the doses can be quite high. But so every now and then you can try that. And I think people should feel comfortable, be careful, take it slow, like you said, one step at a time. But if you do find your tolerance is up to where you want it to be, you can every now and then take a higher dose to see for certain things and go from there.
Not me trying a half bottle of Glia after this.
Yeah, exactly. Just
Just go to the moon.
Yeah.
So you did mention there was a blood test, I think, or some data that you can do to check what your current plasmalogens are at the moment before you take them. And you can just go ahead and take them, right? But if people want more data before they start, they can do that through your website, right?
Yeah, so we have a proton scan test, and we have a whole new series of technology that an elite doctor network has called the biometrics, like our advanced science cyclotron technology and the MRI technology is becoming available publicly very soon.
Oh, good.
Through the group. But the regular test is available. And it's actually very powerful because you're going to see some interesting situations. In CIRS, what happens fundamentally is the overwhelming of the cell overwhelms the mitochondria. Okay, and the you get basically mitochondrial dysfunction caused by this inflammatory stress response. And when that happens, you actually get the peroxisomes overactive. So in some situations, you're going to see the exact opposite. You're going to actually see blood plasmalogens higher than normal. And when you take the plasmalogens, you're going to see the blood plasmalogens come back down because you've reduced the inflammation state. So the blood test looks at your phospholipids. So depending upon what stage you are, like if you're early on, because a lot of it affects young people like yourselves. And so when we're young, we have really good active peroxisome. So children with autism, young women with multiple sclerosis, we can look at those patterns in their blood that are highly reproducible. And we can look at the blood test measures mitochondrial dysfunction, like it measures basically mitochondrial leakage. So when you're in your normal state, your cells have these two organelles. The main one is mitochondria and the peroxisomes. And these are your energy producing. So your mitochondria are like your little nuclear reactors. They're catabolic. So hydrocarbons go in, whether it's from sugar or fat, and the only thing that's supposed to come out of the mitochondria is carbon dioxide and water. It's supposed to be a pure burning organelle. Mitochondrial, water and carbon dioxide, and then ATP, which is the energy of life, comes out of the mitochondria. But if your mitochondria get overwhelmed, they can't process the energy coming in. Okay, and this is why you get this glucose, insulin sensitivity, diabetes type reactions, because the cells, the metabolic state of the cells are insufficient. And this is what drives fatigue. By definition, anyone ever feels fatigue, mitochondrial dysfunction, period. It's a one-to-one. There's no other explanation for it. It's also why I don't get in tangents, but if you get the flu, for example, right? Like it doesn't have to be CIRS. You get sick. And when does the flu? You make you feel tired. Well, why does the flu make you tired? Think about it. Like, how is it? What's it doing? Why are you tired when you have the flu? Well, it's because your immune system is upregulated and your body is putting a lot of energy into this immune response, because this is like, okay, I'm going to try to protect you from dying in the next 2 hours. So I'm going to prioritize your immune system over your regular system, and it sucks the energy out of those cells, right? And you feel tired. So in CIRS and chronic autoimmune, the fatigue is from that mitochondrial insufficiency. And so the blood test will look at that, and you can look at how that corrects itself. And then the peroxisomes are where your anabolic activity occurs. It's where you make your steroid hormones and like the molecules, like it creates building blocks for other things in your cells. So measuring your cholesterol levels. And so this is where Jacie meant where you are in your pathway. When you're early on, you're in this inflamed state and your body might be keeping up with the inflamed state, but it may not have reached that full deficiency level yet. And so the blood test can kind of see where you are in that pathway. And so it measures your methyltransferase system, like not just homocysteine, but your phosphatidylcholine levels and your sphingomyelin levels, measures your peroxisomal function, kidney function, phospholipids, and also keeping up on your iron levels. This is like your micronutrients is a big deal. People, like even with the whole situation with COVID, a big predictor of poor outcomes in COVID was anemia, right? So iron is a critical thing we just don't keep an eye on. So there's a few things that are very commonly deficient. Phosphatidylcholines, right? Especially like, if you're eating a good meat diet, you're typically okay, but there's a lot of people, like eggs are a big source, fatty meats, but probably 30% of the population is choline deficient. And that messes up a whole lot of things. And so the test measures all these things collectively. And so you get a full readout of your biochemical status from an equilibrium perspective. Yeah. So, and that's kind of where, like I've been studying, where all my research comes from is the epidemiological side. Like my freezers here in the lab, I got probably 100,000 blood samples in my freezers from around the world. So all of these biomarkers were discovered from my research in epidemiology, like looking for cancer, prodromes, and dementia, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, autism, these diseases. And so I've done these big, large studies all around the world. And then Proton Scan blood test basically has that top 30 list, like these bad pennies that just keep on showing up all over the place. And so these phosphatidylcholine deficiencies, your methyltransferase systems, and all these systems, and this is where it gets kind of difficult when you're dealing with an inflammatory disease, because you're kind of chasing your tail, right? Like, okay, what is my canary in the coal mine? Like, is there one thing that is affecting me? And that's very well could be happening. So you could have a methyltransferase insufficiency and not know it because we have reserve capacity. So say you have your regular methyltransferase, like we talk about homocysteine and these things, but say you're only running at 50%. Well, you probably wouldn't even know it because 50% is usually more than enough for everyone. You wouldn't know it until maybe you're 70. But now you get CIRS, and all of a sudden that 50% shows up as being okay. Now you got the stress on your system, and it reveals that insufficiency. Okay. And this is what happens in these situations because it could be one random event or another. And so is when you get these stressors on our system that they kind of reveal each of our own personal, canary in the coal mine concept. Like what's our weak link biochemically? And then you just need to make sure you support that system. And there's lots of easy ways to doing these things. So
yeah. No, that's great. So we'll definitely direct people to your website to learn more about that and obviously plasmalogens in general. But is there any other place we should direct people to either reach out to you if they need to, or at least look at your products and services?
If you go to prodrome.com, that's where you can buy whatever you want a la carte. Okay, it's there. There's blood tests, there's the supplements, and access to some of the doctors. Then the drgoodenowe.com website, that's where all the education. We have a restorative health center in Canada where people come and live with us for 3 months. Like we physically have, like we're a bricks and mortar organization. So we do our own manufacturing here in Temecula. We do our own laboratories here. We have inpatient facilities that, like for people with ALS and MS that we actually take care of them full time while they're getting through things. And then we have a remote service that we physically fly to people's homes and help. So we try to provide these type of services. So the drgoodenowe.com site gives you access to, events that were happening. We have a big event March 21st and 22nd called the Restorative Health Summit. I'm actually particularly proud of this event because we're actually bringing in real people like yourselves who have overcome serious diseases. Like You'll see Lisa Grillo, who has restored her vision after 30 years of blindness from multiple sclerosis. You see Annath, who's coming in from Australia, who had ALS and he's now walking unassisted. And so we have these ALS recoveries, and we have people with autism that are been nonverbal for 17 years, who's now singing and talking and doing stand-up comedy with their family. And so these are the type of stories. We have real people, human beings that actually have, and I tell people like this, if you want to learn how to run a mile under 4 minutes, you want to train with other runners who've run 4-minute miles. Okay. You want to be with people who have the expectation of success. Okay. They expect to get better. Okay. And if you have that expectation, you keep looking, right? You're not in this depressive fatality state. You're saying, you know what? If these people can get better, they're not aliens. They're humans like the rest of us. So we can do this. And if we're not doing it, we're not trying hard enough, and we're not actually finding the right recipe for that individual person, because clearly people can get better. Okay, that has been proven. And so we have the doctors, like I'll do a bit of a lecture on the topic, like Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis and ALS, and an actual person and doctors who are dealing with that. So all together in one session, because what I find as a scientist is that there's these silos, like doctors and scientists kind of go and talk to themselves, right? Mm-hmm. Amongst themselves. And it's like patient A, it's not even personal, right? Like they depersonalize everything. And then you have these support groups where people are really kind of supporting each other, but yet they don't always have access to all the doctor information.
Right.
And so we want to bring these groups of people together and actually have proper conversations. Anyway, so that's what we're doing. So if you go to drgoodenowe.com, all that kind of stuff is going on, and whatever conferences I'm at, and so on and so forth will be there.
That's great. Yeah, and that if you're watching this the week that we put this out, which most of our viewers do, that will be coming up very soon. So make sure to check that out and get registered for that if you're interested.
It's basically it's very low cost.
That's awesome.
Show up. It's in California. It's in La Jolla. We're funding the thing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goodenowe, for joining us today. We appreciate you so much in the work that you do, especially for such vulnerable patient communities. We can't thank you enough.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. So just talked your ear off today, but it was wonderful chit-chatting with you guys. And I love this stuff. I love people. Like, it's just kind of finding solutions, and just kind of getting in there. And you guys are just doing amazing work out there, getting these groups of people together. And it's sharing your experiences. We do this with the rare disease community. Like everyone with these difficult diseases, they become experts in their own right. And as you work with each other, it's the little things that make a big difference. How to, we can get the theory, we get the practicality, but, getting a good recipe or a good strategy for the day can make the world a difference in someone's life.
Absolutely.
And that's where the community of people really comes into play.
Awesome.
Well, great work, guys.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And for more resources and support, you can always go visit us at theCIRSgroup.com.
See you there.